So South African teams are now in their second season Champions Cup. How do we think they're going to do?
It's going to be pretty straightforward. South Africa is yet to dominate. As you know, that happens in World Rugby, so no surprises.
Yeah, fully agree. I mean, we did a clean sweep last weekend, about to do a clean sweep this weekend, and then I expect the Bulls and the Stormers to both go on in the Champions Cup and have a great run as well. I got the Stormers to win it all.
I'm just thinking though, because last year they both fell out to quarterfinals. Actually, 3 of them did. Sharks did as well. To mediocre teams. So do you think that's going to happen again this year?
No, it's now better player management. We know what to expect in the tournament. It's not going to be the same hiccups. So I think we've learned from what we went through last year. So it's definitely not going to be the same.
Yeah, from the rest of Europe, I'm definitely more nervous about South African teams this year. Both at home, they both have the experience from last year. But not being able to play at home in the semis is a big negative point for them.
Fully agree. I mean, it's massive. You usually think about the South African crowds. It's an absolute fortress to go there and actually get a victory. But the good thing is, like, obviously, the two main teams, the Stormers and the Bulls, obviously had the time to build with their squads in terms of squad depth. I think that was a big factor that we lacked last season. But this season, we've done better in terms of squad rotation. You don't put your full-strength team out for everyone and getting that experience.
With the Stormers having better player management just in their little setup with Frans Malherbe missing like most of the season. He's well rested. I think that dominance in the scrum, even when we do travel to Europe, will be way more significant than it was with the Frans Malherbe playing 90% of the games last year and being absolutely burnt out when it came to the Champions Cup last year.
So let's just say that they have to play that home semi or the away semi over in England against a team that isn't from South Africa. So you could end up playing Leinster, you could end up playing Munster, not at home. Do you think they win that game?
Obviously, it makes it a bit more tough, to be fair. Like, the conditions play a massive factor, the way that the Stormers and the Bulls play. We not only do the crowd usually obviously back us, but then you have the dry conditions. We can dominate physically and stuff. We're not used to that wet, rainy game. We kind of have to go into that kicking ball game. You saw what happened when we played England in the World Cup final. We had semi-final. We had to take off Marnie because he wasn't the best fit necessarily for that type of game. So obviously that's a bit of a worrying point because it's massive. Home, everyone wants to play and place in the positions in the pool stages to get those home games. But it doesn't matter where the South African team places. We don't get that home game.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that last year there wasn't a huge crowd. There wasn't huge crowds at the Champions Cup games in South Africa. Do you think there's going to be a bit more attention to it this year now that they've kind of proved themselves in the URC and they're aware that this competition is big as well?
Definitely. Now that they're aware of the big names in the Northern Hemisphere sides, I think it's going to be, yes, it will be. These crowds will be bigger.
Right, so I hope they do well just for the sake of the URC and the tournament, but I personally don't think they're going to do as well as we're saying. I think it's going to be a Leinster versus French team final, but up for debate, let me know below. So Leinster, by far the best looking team going into the Champions Cup knockout stage. Can they do the double? So win the Champions Cup and win the URC.
That you just slid that in past the two lads. The facial expressions are amazing. I don't know. I mean, I don't really care how they go in the URC, to be honest with you. Like, as long as, Europe is all I really care about. I'm a bit worried because I thought Ireland looked a bit tired by the end of the Six Nations. And, the bulk of that playing group is going to be in that Leinster team. South African teams are going to be fresh, not having played in the Six Nations. But Leinster should have that home tie route to the final. So you would expect them to get to a final with the depth and the quality that they have.
Yeah,
I fully disagree. Fully. I think because Ireland has played together, obviously there's a lot of the Irish guys that play for Leinster as well, but the coaching staff, if you look at Ninaber and Andy Farrell, like it's totally two different coaches. Like the system isn't the same. I think the chemistry is going to be lacking. Going up against the likes of the South African teams that have been playing together the whole time, the chemistry looks way better. Leinster might have the most points in the URC, but they've not been looking like the best team, in my opinion. I think the Bulls have looked way better, way more dominant victories. Maybe they're a bit more experienced in the Champions Cup, but let's not get carried away over here.
Yes, I think with Leinster, putting all their strongest players on the bench, I think that's where I agree with Casual Bias that they needed them to start now. They've had a week's rest, so they needed them to start so they can build that team chemistry going into the Champions Cup. Because if you don't care so much about URC, why are you not starting your guys, getting them system fit? Because you got a new coach now. They haven't played under Jock Ninober, so I think I would have started them rather than bench them.
I definitely see why they've left the guys out. I think with the miles on the clock, and I don't think they're going to be looking to make any sweeping systems changes before a big knockout game in Europe. Like I think there'll be some variations on sort of similar themes that they've been playing, but I'd be surprised if they go in there and load up with too much new tactical stuff. But I think it's one of those things. It just depends on the result, and you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. As long as you win, nobody questions it. It's like, oh yeah, great player management. But if you lose, then immediately the knives are out and people start asking questions. I think Leinster are just lucky enough that Leicester just aren't that strong comparatively, and so Leinster should always get through that game.
My biggest concern is the path they've given us. So to win the tournament, we have to go through Leicester, which I know they're not as good as some other teams, but they still got Andrew Pollard and a lot of good players. Then we've got Stormers and La Rochelle, arguably the toughest quarterfinal you could have got. And then after that, we're going to have like the Bulls or Munster or Northampton. And then we have to go play Bordeaux, Toulouse, Sarries in the final. So of any years, I think we could go out early this year. But again, we're also a concern to those teams. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, my big question is like, how does the guys of Leinster take it, knowing they did all the hard yards and then the other guys just come in for the big games? I think I can't see Leinster doing well this tournament. I think they're a bit heartbroken after the previous seasons, being disappointed, falling out in the semi-finals, losing in the final twice. I just think just cut it short this time. Just fall out now. You're not going to win it after all. Just take the heartbreak, move on, look forward to next season. Take a break.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with you because it sounded like a cop out there from Leinster now, saying that these are the guys that they have coming up and they might fall out early, but that sounds like an excuse to me because in order to be the best, you got to beat the best. So regardless of the route that you take, look at the Springboks in the World Cup, the semi-finals, the quarterfinals and the finals. They had the three and the group stages for that matter was all the toughest games that you can imagine.
That's the thing, yeah. But I don't know. I just think since we got the top seed, we're very lucky to. It came down to one try in the Leicester game that we got the top seed on our side of the draw. But I just think that's the reason we're going to get to the final. We're going to have home knockouts, and come the URC, if they win the Champions Cup the week before the URC playoffs, they're just going to go dominate the URC after that because, you know, the momentum that winning a Heineken Cup gives you. I know the South African teams haven't experienced that yet, and they probably won't this year either. But I think they win the both.
Just go on and dominate the URC. You haven't dominated a single season that the South African teams have been there. You've never won a tournament, not Ireland or Leinster, with South African teams in it. That is embarrassing for you. It's your own tournament. You say you are the dominating force. You haven't won dog shit. You haven't won anything. You are a disgrace to the tournaments. Okay, so relax, pipe down. You talk about URC. We actually have home games then. You're not winning in South Africa. I don't think you've ever won in South Africa. So sit there, shut up, and move on.
Haven't come up against Leinster's first team yet then, South Africa though.
Just a little bit of perspective in the face of this South African melee that we're dealing with all of a sudden this week. Like,
we won.
Leinster are super successful in the competition. I know because they haven't been on maybe their top peak levels. I feel like they're getting a lot of criticism that's kind of a bit unwarranted, a bit like what Ireland got during the Six Nations. And I think, like, I definitely fear. I actually fear the Bulls more than I fear the Stormers. But I definitely fear the South African teams. I think like one of them could easily go and win it. They'd have to win a couple of away games, but it's possible. But a bit of respect on Leinster's name. They're a top-class team. Most of the team is the Ireland team, who beat you boys in the group stage. I know it didn't count for anything in the end, but we did do it.
People are so quick to put Leinster down, forgetting they've won this tournament 4 times, second only to Toulouse, and then they won the URC 8 times, which is 4 in a row. So, and you're coming out saying, oh, but they don't care about the competition. They're bad in the competitions. We are the best in the URC by a long, long shot, and then we're the second best in Europe, and we could very easily tie Toulouse in Cup wins this year. So I don't know where this Leinster slander is coming from.
Leinster, it comes down to how many times have you won it when there's real competition in it. You haven't won it a single time. You're talking about the past. You focused so many times on the past. You haven't won it a single time since we've been there. So you're talking in circles, but you haven't debunked the argument. You're just sitting there and making stuff up. We don't care about the past. You could talk about how good Australia is from 2003. No one cares. Talk about Australia now.
But you see, Leinster have made 2 finals. They've only lost them to arguably one of the best teams in Europe we've ever seen. South Africa didn't get near the final last year. Can we mention you like to call Ireland quarter-final merchants last year? 3 of your teams fell out in the quarter-finals of the Heineken Cup last year. And again, like the legacy that Leinster has, it's unmatched in club rugby except Toulouse. So I don't know, and I just don't think the South African teams are all that. Like, you talk about them being the best in the world. They've only won one competition where Leinster just didn't care. They had won the previous 4 of them. And when it matters, which in Europe, when it matters, is a Champions Cup knockout stage, they all fell out.
Do you really think that we're going to buy the fact that you think Leinster does not care about a certain competition, because now that there is actual competition in said competition, that you think that Leinster didn't care about that competition? And the reason why the South African teams fell out is because we obviously didn't know how to player management for 3 competitions. South Africa was taking part in 3 competitions at the exact same time. So just pace yourself there when you do that, when you do these absurd takes on Leinster being this be-all and end-all when South Africa is clearly the better teams.
Brett, I just loved how you used the argument of the South African franchise teams falling out in quarterfinals to kind of debunk their mishaps in the World Cup, as if it's the same thing.
We're not talking about the World Cup here, lads.
I'd fall out in the quarterfinals every single time. Every single year, I'd have the heartbreak of a quarterfinal loss in franchise rugby, but win the World Cup the whole time.
It always goes back to the World Cup when it's not for 4 years.
I was going to say, what tournament are we talking about again? Like, you were accusing us of moving the goalposts. Now we're on to the World Cup and we're on to the next 16 years. I mean, I do think what Brett said is right. I don't think you can hold last year against the South African teams because, like, the preparation and the lack of... Didn't they, like, only find out even where they were playing, like, 7 days before the game? Like, stuff like that is crazy.
They had the organisation of Super Rugby then going to, like, 3 competitions and playing in Europe.
Exactly. It's a lot to ask. And this year they'll be much more settled and they'll have, like, a better plan for it. And God, man, I just hope they both don't go on a run because we will literally never hear the end of it from these 2.
I'm becoming a cricket fan if South African team ever wins the Heineken Cup. We will never hear the end of it. So, who's winning the Heineken Cup this season?
Stormers. You gotta. It's not only just back your team. It's CasualBiasRugby, so I gotta back my team. But I'm feeling confident. We're getting momentum. We're pushing forward. The only kind of thing that's holding us back a bit is the fact that we don't have any home games. So it depends on the weather, but I think it's getting summer there in the UK, so it could play in our favour. But yeah, you gotta back your boys. I think Leinster will kind of disappoint. I think they'll fall out. Not enough chemistry to lose. Not filling me with enough confidence. I think if I had to pick a second team, it would be Bordeaux. But yeah, I'm going Stormers.
I'm going to go Leinster. I think the run of home games up to the final, and I think enough of the top players still being in pretty good nick. Like Henshaw looked great in the Six Nations, Dan Sheehan looked great in the Six Nations, Big Joe McCarthy looking very good too. They've got some tough games. It feels like a bit of it feels like an important year for them because losing in the final last year, they're going to come up against some really big teams on the way to the final this year, and if they go out early, like Casual says they will, there are going to be loads of questions asked. It's going to be all that Irish teams with chokers, all that kind of stuff. So I'm backing them to get through it, though, and get another star this year. But if I had to pick an outsider, Sarries have a real like last dance feel about them this year. There's just something with Farrell having a bit of time away from England. He looks in great nick. and they absolutely smashed Quins at the weekend. They looked awesome. So maybe them. Yeah, that's my call.
I'm gonna agree with both of you guys because I do see Leinster as the biggest threat in this competition so far because of how desperately they kind of need to win it, especially coming from this World Cup, being labelled international chokers, and then obviously that trend is just going to carry on if they don't do well in the URC, in the URC and in the Champions Cup for that matter. I do, however, see that the Stormers. Reason why I'm saying it, yes, they're my team, but the reason why I'm backing them is because Frans Malherbe had 5 months off to rest. Dan du Plessis is coming back from his injury and he's finding his great form again that potentially could have put him in a box side last year. Our back three is gelling very well with Damien Willemse probably being the best fullback currently at this point in the whole competition. So I'm backing that cause. That the Stormers will take it, and Leinster will probably be my dark horse to potentially take it.
I'm going to say Leinster win it, Leinster do the double, and I just think, like everyone's point, they haven't won anything in 2 seasons. This tournament is, like, they are favourites to win it every year, and the last few years they just have fallen out of it early or lost the final, so I think no one's more determined than Leinster to go win it. No one's looking better than Leinster, and I just think the opposition this year compared to how Leinster dominated in the group stage is just unmatched. My dark horses personally are Bordeaux. I think if Leinster don't make the final, they go out in semis or go out in quarters, is going to be Bordeaux. They're just the 10-0 masterclass. They've the 9 and 10 for France who played in Six Nations. I think they can go on a dominating run and win it. But other than that, I just don't think anyone's going to stop Leinster this season. They're just too determined. So the Club Rugby's biggest stage is coming up, Champions Cup. South African teams are playing in it, and the question is, do South African players and fans care hugely about the franchise provincial club rugby?
Well, I think there was a long time that it kind of got a bit stale, but I think since we joined the URC, it's a kind of a new beginning. We kind of got tired losing against the New Zealand teams the whole time. But after this has started again, you're seeing the fans come out. Obviously, there's still a couple of games that are dull, that don't have too many fans out there. But if you look at the people that come out to watch the Stormers versus the Bulls, you can't say that the South African teams don't care. You look at even the views that we get on social media when we talk about those teams.
So they're getting more involved with the local teams, the teams that don't play in the URC, because if a team does poorly in the URC, for example, like the Sharks, then there's talks of maybe the Pumas should replace them in the URC, and the Pumas is a lower ranked side. Or the Cheetahs or anything for that matter. So yes, it has helped us, and yes, South Africa cares a lot about club rugby and provincial rugby.
Yeah, and also to add to it, something that I forgot to mention is also look at the amount of players that play overseas but have come back now to play for our clubs. You just know that they're still passionate about the game. They want to play for our teams. The big thing was always just the money that we can offer, but you're seeing more and more American interest in terms of financial interest into our teams, players that want to come back to South Africa and play for the likes of the Stormers, the Bulls, the Sharks, the Lions. So yeah, it is rejuvenated, and we are all hyped up for the seasons to come, which is absolutely brilliant to see, because as we mentioned before, it felt a bit stale, but we have to give credit to the ERC for bringing this opportunity to us.
And Leinster, what do you think of South African sides in the European competitions while we at it?
In terms of the URC, it's just changed the URC completely. So on our last 2 episodes there, we were talking about how Leinster stopped caring about the URC. But now that news have come in, it's suddenly a hard to win. As we've seen the last 2 seasons, Leinster haven't won it, whereas before the 17 joined, they'd won 4 in a row. So it's leveled the URC up so much. And then in terms of the Champions Cup, they haven't done well in it yet, and they've only played 1 season in it. They have also uplifted that competition, especially with you could end up having South Africa trying to beat a team there. It just adds another level of difficulty to an already really difficult competition. So I think some massive things for European rugby. I hope you stay around. I think the teams are great.